Yeah, each decade has its own thing. It was .com in my early part of the career, but right now, of course, AI is overhyped. I mean, it is here to stay, but the kind of money that's being poured in is a little bit overhyped. There's one quote I got from one of those books I was reading: "Is simplicity is the ultimate sophistication." A lot of people think you need to do complicated stuff to be really successful. I believe some simple things, if you follow, I think that should be get you to 95% of your successful path. Anything you develop should be for the world. I mean, you can target local India opportunities, but it should be world class, and that's where there'll be a lot more potential.
In today's episode, we are joined by Srini Chinamilli, co-founder and CEO of Tessolve, the world's largest standalone semiconductor engineering solutions company. With 30 plus years in semiconductor, Srini has led chip design, testing, and productization at a global scale. In his journey at Tessolve, the company has expanded to 10 plus countries, trained more than 5,000 engineers, and built India's first independent test lab. Now generating more than 1,000 crore in annual revenue, Tessolve is driving India's semiconductor revolution, which has picked up in a big way over the last few years. Join us as we dive into Srini's journey on scaling a global leader. Srini, welcome to the Founders Unfiltered podcast.
Thanks, Aviral and Mazin. Looking forward to talking to you.
So we'll start with the rapid fire. You built a global company. What's one city that has surprised you most on your travels?
I would say Shanghai, China. When I first went there 10 years back, I was surprised to see the modernity that is they built up in such a short time. Yeah.
Yes, sir. What's a non-tech skill that unexpectedly helped you build Tessolve?
Yeah, I'm a very avid tennis player, and surprisingly, I could do a lot of networking, and sometimes, much more easier to access people that way than formal through the companies and so on. Yeah, it really helped me network with people.
What's a semiconductor trend you think is overhyped?
Yeah, each decade has its own thing. It was .com in my early part of the career, but right now, of course, AI is. I believe it's overhyped. I mean, it is here to stay, but the kind of money that's being poured in is a little bit overhyped. Yes.
You've seen the industry evolve. What's one belief that you held 10 years ago about chip design that you no longer think is true?
I mean, I used to think the most complicated chips can be designed only out of the US, places like Silicon Valley and so on. But now that's no longer true. We have places in India, in China, and other places that can equally do a good job.
And the reverse question now: what's one belief that you hold that other people don't? What's one truth that few people agree with you on?
Yeah, that's a tough one, but I believe there is a. I'm a Warren Buffett fan, and there's a lot of books I read around it. And there's one quote I got from one of those books I was reading: is simplicity is the ultimate sophistication. A lot of people think you need to do complicated stuff to be really successful. I believe some simple things, if you follow, I think that should be get you to 95% of your successful path. A lot of people think that we have to do a lot of complicated stuff. Yeah.
Was this simplicity part of your journey to being an entrepreneur? Would love to learn more about how you got into entrepreneurship as well. What's your background? Where did you grow up? Where did you, study? You obviously were at USC in the US. If you could share with us.
I come from a very, very small, rural town in the coastal Andhra. My parents, my dad is a doctor, and he emphasized a lot on good education. And my mom, she's barely completed 10th standard, but both of them provided good foundation for us. So at that time there was no English medium school when I was growing up. Of course, now you have every other street there is a good English medium school. So I was sent to a boarding school at the age of, when I was, it was actually third standard. I went to a boarding school away from home. I thank my dad for it, because at that time he had the vision. It was not very often that people are sent to boarding schools. This school gave me a good foundation, right? Not just academics. I got exposed to a lot of sports, extracurricular activities. Got to meet people from different parts of the state. So that way, it was a good childhood. I would say I missed home, but the school was a lot of fun too. One thing about my mom, I should say that even though she's only barely past 10th grade, she was very strict. Well, I have a brother and sister. All of us have done well academically. She's very strict in our elementary school. She emphasized a lot on studies, and she also got us exposed to all these epics like Ramayana, Mahabharata. She used to also get people to tell us these stories. A lot of values that we learned is from this, and that carried through a lot of even when I'm an adult now. But yeah, it was a good stint I had in India, and then I went to the US for my masters, and I did my masters from USC. This is the year 1992. I graduated. At that time, it was kind of a recessionary time. It was not a great time to graduate, and at that time we had a clock. 6 months, if you don't find a job, then you're out of the country. These days you have this 3 year. So I got into the first job I got. I took it. I was told that it's a 5 people company, and it turned out after I joined the company, I learned that so there's out of the 5 people, one is the CEO, and then it was CEO's wife who ran the HR operations and everything, and then the 2 part-time employees, and
Okay.
and I was
You're basically now first employee.
yeah, I would say pretty much. And then some of my friends got into some large companies, and it's very nice orientations, benefits package, and so on. I was wondering, hey, what did I get into? But looking back, this was probably the best thing that ever happened to me, because in this company, I was the chief developer, engineering guy. Then I had the chance to go to different customer sites. I was the person in charge of installing the software we were developing for the semiconductors. Got to interact with a lot of people. I was going to trade shows. I had to display our product and sell. So I was doing marketing, sales, engineering, and everything. So there I got the first sense of what it takes to be an entrepreneur. So my boss was an entrepreneur, obviously. He had this small setup. But my entrepreneurial bug got in at that time, right? This is great. It feels good to have your own company, do a lot of different things. I was working more than 12 hours a day because it's just a small company. Like Steve Jobs said in one of his speeches, right? You can only connect the dots backwards. So even though initially when I regretted it, but this gave me a good exposure. So I thought one day I should start a company of my own, right? So that's where the entrepreneurial bug got in. Of course, then I joined a large company, $1 billion company. But there, everything looked easy because I'm coming from this startup. And any new startup group starting within that large company, I used to volunteer. I used to be the first volunteer, say, hey, let me go join that. Then I joined a startup again. This is a professional startup, 20 plus people when I joined. Then it went IPO. So there also I got a good taste of, hey, what it takes to take a company from startup all the way to IPO. So this was I was in my mid 30s at this time. I worked in the industry for about 12, 13 years. And then I thought, okay, now is the time, right? I had this urge to start something of my own. But I thought I was too young. So I approached my boss. I said, I showed him what we can do. I tried to convince him, we can both do this together. And I also had some colleagues. So we had a lot of lunches together, brainstormed on this idea. We all agreed, hey, this is something we can do. And but when the time came to quit the job, my boss was not ready, right? And then my colleagues were not ready also. Then I was still looking, right? I had this confidence for whatever reason. Obviously, you're not as smart, right? I mean, you need to be dumb enough to think that you'll succeed the first time. I talked to my mentors. They were all well wishers for me, but somehow they didn't have a good feeling about this. But then I ran into Raja, right, who's the other founder, and he had similar ideas, and I was his customer in the Silicon Valley. And what I liked about him was he also quit his job, so he had the belief, strong enough belief to quit his job and do this full time. Then we both met for coffee and said, hey, why don't it's both similar ideas, why don't we join hands? And that's how we got started. I put in all my savings, into the company. Then I sold my house in the US. I wanted to make sure, move to India because that's where we could build the engineering team. I didn't want to have second thoughts, right? Because after going for a year, come back and so on. So let's sell the house in the US so that give it 5 years in India and see how it works. Luckily, my wife was very supportive. And my kids were too young to question, right? They were only 3 and 5. So we moved to India, and that's how we got started. Of course, initially the plans were very optimistic. Raja had an optimistic plan. I had even more optimistic plan.
Okay.
I remember initially we raised some angel funding. I remember talking to one of the angel investors. He was a CEO of some big corporate company. And he asked me, what's your plan? I looked him straight in the eye and said, hey, in 3 years, we'll make a $10 million revenue, right? In those days, 10 million meant something.
Yes. It still does, actually. I mean, 10 million is a lot of money even today.
At that time, he must be laughing inside because I came to know later that he was running a similar setup as part of this large conglomerate, and they put in a lot of money. And they didn't hit 10 million for a long time, right? But he was outside, he was very encouraging and said, hey, great, this is a great plan. Incidentally, it took us 6 years to cross 10 million. Obviously, things are not rosy, right? So,
right.
But that's how we got started. I mean, there was, in fact, even for Raja, right? When I talked to my mentors, they did not say good things about him, right? For whatever reason. But what I liked was, hey, he had the conviction to start a company. That's all I needed, right? And it's like, when you get your first idea, you're so passionate. It's like your first love, right? No matter what anybody says, you will just get started. And that's how we got started. Yeah.
Awesome. And in the year you started, semiconductor startups were extremely rare. What convinced you that company like this needed to exist, and specifically in India, which is probably not most forward? Obviously, we had the Mohali Semiconductor Laboratory which burnt, and India had some progress in the late 80s, but I think by the early 2000s it was quite clear India was very behind. So what was your thinking there?
Yeah, at that time, actually, at least the thesis was, I was beginning to see a lot of semiconductor chip design activities starting out. Of course, TI was one of the initial folks who set up in the 80s, but most of the design activities started in the 90s. And what I noticed was a lot of the productization of the chips was again, there's being sent back, and all the bring up was happening in the US or Europe or other places. The initial design was done here. So we thought if we set up something where companies can also productize, right? Once the chip comes back from the fabrication unit, all the evaluation activity, making it a full product, right? That activity, we can be the first in the country. that was the thesis for starting something in India. Of course, in the hindsight, that was not the right thesis. What we found was companies were doing. They were not. Now the companies are, of course, much more mature. In those days, people were doing just some block level designs, not full chip tape outs, right? Where there was not really a need. So when we first built out our labs and everything, there's not much work. We we because companies were not ready, except for TI, of course. I can come to that, but then we had to rely on back in to the companies in the US, right, to give us some business. But the answer to your question is, yeah, I mean, that was our thinking in the early days. But not having business in India, I would say, again, in the hindsight, it is one of the best things that happened to us because, we had to rely on, our contacts in the Silicon Valley and other places. Luckily, all the friends who were in a position to give business gave us business from the Silicon Valley in the US. And
walk us through that. How did you go about getting your first few customers? What was
if you look at, our first customers was, surprisingly, it was not a formal pitch, right? The two places where we got, so one is, of course, my friends that I knew in the Silicon Valley. They've seen my capabilities there. They were confident enough to give the work to us. So these are all cutting edge startups in the Silicon Valley, and we got some business from there. In the large customers, TI was the first to give us the business, and there also TI offered me when I was moving to India. Before this startup, I was thinking I will have a soft landing to a large company and then do this. So in that process, I didn't take up the job.
Okay.
But I interviewed with TI and got to know TI India, and I got to know all the senior managers there. At the end, I said, sorry, I'm going to do this, startup of my own. It is a very good package and everything, but just like I told you, right, when you're in love, you kind of disregard all the all the other things. But the good side effect of that is everybody came to know me through the interview process. They kind of knew my capabilities. Then when I went back to them, this team, I'll make sure the work will get done. They all gave me opportunity. They're all very good, accomplished folks. So TI, in the large customers, TI gave us the first break, even when we were like 10 people company. And then a lot of startups in the US, right? We got business from. So these are all world-class companies, right? So where, we had to set up good systems, good training processes, train our engineers, and a lot of scars on my back, right? We had to go through a lot of hard work to give a good quality work, because I had a bunch of fresh grads. In the Silicon Valley, I used to manage people who are already experienced folks. Whereas here, a bunch of fresh grads, very capable, eager, but didn't know much about the semiconductor test and so on.
So it's an interesting dynamic. I mean, on the one side, you're working with these large, world-class companies. On the other hand, you had a young workforce. How did you kind of balance both of these, and how did you develop your team in India?
I mean, the first batch, of course, like I said, initially we didn't have much work, right? And I was, believe it or not, I was playing a lot of table tennis with them just to keep them engaged, right? But we are fortunate to have a good batch, right? I mean, we had a good screening process out of a lot of 500-600 people who show up. We had a written test, a good interview process, and we select 15 out of them. In fact, people from the first batch, some of them are still with the company. In fact, some of the early folk, they're all in the senior director. One of them is a senior vice president. That's something that gives us a lot of pride. But initially, we had to develop our own. Even in India, we could not hire a lot of senior folks. So we developed a very, in fact, forced us to develop a very comprehensive training program. In fact, all the whoever was senior was teaching, including myself. I remember one class I was teaching where I had regular projects to do, but that material, right? I mean, you need to prepare training material. So get up at 4, because some of the customers also signed up, so I can't just be very casual. So in this case, some customers in India. So 4 to 6, prepare the training material, and then those days, the Hostel Road, there was only 2 lanes. So I used to live in Whitefield, and it used to take 2 hours to drive to work, and then 2 hours to drive back. So and then come here, and then by the time teach the class, and then of course
So study in the morning, then drive for 2
teach
hours,
the class, and
teach
then
the class.
and then do some projects in the evening. And then a lot of people also now contributed to the training. And that's what built the character of the company, right? We all went through some tough times. Money was very little, and then when you set up a lab, if you just think of 2004, right? People did not know what a test equipment is. Our building, it was still under construction. So I moved from Silicon Valley, where everything is plug and play. I can go use a lab, do the development, and come back. Here we had to build. When you build a lab, I realized, God, you need to have a backup generator to make sure, because this equipment have to run 24/7. So we had to build backup generators, and the building was still under construction. So we used to sit next to the lab. I remember once that we finished a presentation. We were telling the customers how great a company we are, good technology. And then the customer was walking out and standing at the door, and they were watering our building. And then that water fell on the customer's head, right? This guy is a guy visiting from the US. A lot of, we have to go through, because not everything is perfect all the time, right? We need to figure out how to work around.
What kept you motivated? I mean, so many challenges, not a lot of work, but you stuck with it. You stuck with your belief. How did you kind of keep yourself going?
Fortunately, we had, I won't be lying, right? A lot of times I thought, Srini, what have you gotten yourself into, right? But, at that time, we had a lot of passion. We never thought we will fail, right? Which is a good thing, because there were 1,000 ways we could have failed. But at that time, we're full of enthusiasm, and we wanted to build a great company, right? And secondly, we had excellent people that we got on board, right? Even the fresh grads and some of the mid-level people that we got, and a lot of passion. In fact, a lot of my motivation, because sometimes, you have good days, sometimes you have some very bad days. I always said, okay, one more day, right? And then the next day you go to work, you run into somebody. I run into a guy who says, he's the first graduate of his family. And, he's learning world-class stuff here. And we sent, we trained about over 5,000 folks in the history of Tessolve. We sent a lot of people to the US, Europe, a lot of people. I feel happy when I think about that. But the motivation, working with good people, and for all entrepreneurs, I would say something, right? The people is very important, right? It's important to have a good vision, but the vision has to be fine-tuned as you go along. But if you don't have good people with you, it's very hard to enjoy the journey. But yeah, we have worked with, the Fresh Grad program was a good program. In fact, it took us a long time, right? First 10 years was a lot of struggle. We had a lot of times we had to prioritize who gets paid first, right? Always the junior most person gets paid first, and then of course the senior management can get paid last. A lot of our vendors would yell at us, right? Because for the customers, we need to get the project done, but then we need to get material from our vendors. And a lot of times I did business trips, right? I used to travel to the US very often. A lot of times it has to fund from my own. My reimbursement might happen after 6-9 months, right? A lot of times my wife used to question me, hey, now you need to pay for business development as well, right? But that's, like I said, the first 10 years built the character of the company. So if you look at our company growth, it took 10 years for us to cross 500 employee mark. Around 2014, we just crossed 17 million. It took six years for 10 million, so about 17 million run rate. Then the next 3 years we doubled, right? We became 1,000 employee. And then the next 3 years we became 2,000. And then the next 4 years we became 3,000. So I guess once you, I think a lot of founders is again, you need to have the resilience in the tough days. Then the growth will be exponential.
For long enough to find it.
But yeah, I mean, it is interesting. In the lab, of course, a lot of different things I never heard of in the US, right? Backup generators. We need to put rat traps, right? I never thought of. We need to take care of rats. Each equipment is like a $2 million equipment, right? And all it takes is one rat to chew on some wires for the machine to come down. So it's an interesting journey. But after we won a few large customers, we never looked back. I think 2008-9 time frame is when we won Qualcomm and a few other customers, and then afterwards, it was a good growth after that. Yeah.
And over the years, you've seen the industry evolve. Many people think that semiconductor manufacturing is one of India's biggest challenges as a nation. What do you think are some of the areas that need more attention, or people should focus on?
I guess manufacturing is always a challenge, right? Because it's not just writing software in computers. It's not just dependent on the talent. But of course, people. I mean, you've seen enough stuff in the news, right? Where first of all, manufacturing is possible, right? Let me start with that. We've sent rockets into space. We've built. Excellent. There's a big automobile industry. We've launched satellites. It is possible in India, right? But what are some of the challenges, I would say, for semiconductor? People talk about, of course, talent and technology and so on. But I would say the biggest challenge is infrastructure. Infrastructure has gotten much better, but the government has to continue to focus on building good infrastructure. For example, even for Tessolve, when we set up Tessolve, we would give all these pitches about how we can address this technology and everything. Finally, it would come to, hey, if we ship something to India, some board or some chips to India, it gets stuck in customs for weeks together, and then if I send it to Singapore, it's the same day, or if I send it to China or even in the US, right? Because you cannot afford to have. So those are things, it was very hard for us to defend, right? Of course, we always danced around saying that, hey, we have a better way to release parts from customs. Now, over the years, I've been in India for 14 years, of course, 2004 to 2018, and now I'm based in the US. The infrastructure has improved, even the customs procedures, all that have improved quite a bit. But it should still be seamless. It should be as good as, whatever happens in the best parts of the world, like Taiwan, China, and so on. So that is, I would say, the biggest challenge for manufacturing in India. It's become much better, but it should be world class, right? Otherwise, people will not have confidence to deal with India.
No, that makes a lot of sense. And talking about Tessolve, you guys span industries. You've worked on chips for AI, automotive chips. How do you decide which areas to focus on? Is it mostly driven by customers, or are you picking specific industries?
No, we look at the industry requirements. We also we work very closely with the customers. Now, we provide a platform, right, which can be applied to different industries. We provide a system on chip, both for design as well as test technology, that can be applied to many areas. Now, having said that, we've been around for 20 years. So every few years, a new technology comes. When we first started, networking was the prime thing, networking and communications. Afterwards, it was mobile, cell phone, mobile processors, and so on. And we need to be prepared because you can't get stuck in one thing. Now, of course, what's driving our growth is AI-based chips, electrification of cars, and of course, in industrial, in Industry 4.0 and so on, and 5G. So we pick top 3-4 areas where our technology, our platform can be applied. But we need to change. Every 10, 5, 8 years from now, it will be something new that will come up. So we should be able to evolve and address those. So we also have something called Center of Excellence, where a lot of people are working on the current customer projects, but these people are working on the next generation of what's coming. So we keep working on the future technologies so that we can easily adapt when the need comes.
And talking about the future and the role of government, incentives have been a hot topic. What's your perspective? In general, what kind of role do you think the government will play in?
I think the government incentive scheme has been it's a good scheme. They had a $10 billion rollout that happened. They have capex incentives both for DLI and PLI scheme. Of course, it's much smaller compared to, let's say, if you look at the US, they're spending $50 billion plus, similar in Europe. But I guess, government, it's a good start. And of course, as the next phase, it's good for them to refill. But what is really one important factor it's missing, and that needs to be something that needs to be addressed. In Silicon Valley, for example, right, there's a lot of startups, that every generation there are a lot of new startups. That's because apart from the talent, India also has a lot of talent. There's a lot of risk capital available. There's a lot of venture funds that pour in a lot of money, so people can quickly try. If it doesn't work, move on, right? India can have like the funds set up, right? I think between the government and the private equity capital, there can be more risk capital kind of funds set up that can encourage entrepreneurs, because government can only do so much, right? You need to have a combination of government. We have a good talent in India. The other thing that's missing is the VC capital, right? Of course, you have a fund yourself, right? You can see for semiconductor industry, you need a much larger VC fund. For example, some of the AI startups are raising 500 million, 600 million, and so on, right? But at least, there should be some kind of funds to encourage the entrepreneurs. And lastly, I would say, people in India also should now take some risks, right? Government can only do so much. People should just be bold. If it fails, that's fine, right? You can always go back to your job, right? There are a lot of jobs available. So people should be bold enough. Just instead of just working for multinational companies, you should go out and start some companies, right? There's a lot of opportunity out there.
That's amazing advice for our listeners as well. But talking about India, you have chosen to expand outside of the tier 1 cities, and walk us through the thought process. What is the strategic advantage there, and how do you see Tessolve growing? As the company grows exponentially, where do you see your talent coming from? How do you
see? When we started the company, in fact, to hire fresh grads, we could not compete with these multinational companies giving 3x, 4x the salaries. So when we first started, we actually went to second-tier colleges in second-tier cities in Tamil Nadu, Andhra, Kerala, and so on. And of course, we used to go pool a lot of colleges together, have this written test and interview process, and that's worked out very good for us. It's a very good experience hiring people from second-tier cities. They're a little bit more, I would say, loyal and good work ethic and so on. So based on that, we thought, why not have centers in second-tier cities also, right? Now we operate out of 9 different cities in India. Our first second-tier city was Coimbatore. It was a very good experience. That center has grown. A lot of people, we have very good work ethic, low attrition rates. We expanded into many others. Now we have Vizag, Kochi, and of course Hubli, and of course Bhubaneswar. I don't know if you call a second-tier city. It's a main city in Orissa. But we are, we believe in the second tier city concept, and we're going to invest more in growing there. Bangalore will always be our headquarters, but we found a lot of success in that, and it's working good so far.
Awesome. And many Indian startups struggle with global expansion. What can you share from your learnings and what startups could do for scaling internationally?
I think anything you develop should be for the world. I mean, you can target local India opportunities, but it should be world class, right? And that's where there'll be a lot more potential, right? Of course, in a local, when we started, like I said before, right? Most of our customers are US based customers, and then of course later on Europe based. The standards were very high, right? I mean, they expected the same level of quality and technical expertise, and we had to tune to that. And of course, afterwards we have some local Indian customers as well. But we can never start just for the India market. It should be, can be for India, but it should be possibly for the world, right? And that's where you'll have a better. And that's what helped us. When we first started, it was all these companies that we worked for, and then it was easier to expand. So if you look at the top 20 semiconductor customers in the world, 90% of them, top 20 semiconductor companies in the world, 90% are our customers. So we have a good, we built a good reputation. Some of them have been with us for 15 plus years, continue to be our customers. Most of them have more than 10 years of good experience with us. But yeah, I mean, from the start, if you build for the world, then it's easier to expand internationally.
And there's so much chatter around chips, and they've become incredibly important. There's a lot of complexity increasing as well. They're becoming specialist and more focused. What's one emerging challenge that you are seeing in semiconductor testing specifically that nobody is thinking about or probably prepared for?
So the as the chips become more complex, I mean, if you look at now, people are trying to figure out. Of course, one is chips are becoming, as the process nodes shrink, you can build more functionality into the same die. So die is the wafer form of each chip. Now what's happening is people are trying to put many dies in the same package, right? So they can be, there's one hyperscaler chip that has 900 CPU cores under one chip, and then on top of it they have other memories and peripherals. So it's like now I don't know if you've heard of chiplet, right? So either chiplet or 3D kind of packaging. They're trying to pack many chips under one package. So what that does is the test complexity increases, right? Because not only should there's not just you're not just testing one particular chip, you're testing thousands of chips packaged and as one chip, right? So the test flow becomes very, very complex, and associated with it, the power consumption, each chip can be 800 to 1000 watts. These are very large chips consuming a lot of power. How do you manage the thermal complexity? How do you manage the cooling and heating of the chip? And these chips have now 112 Gbps plus. Some of them are, in the optical side, hundreds of gigabits. So both in terms of speed, complexity, and power, they're all increasing, which is a good thing. That gives us more business, right? Because the more complex it becomes, the more complex solutions are required. And for example, the last 2 years, we've captured a lot of, and these are all AI-based chips. We captured, good projects from some of these hyperscaler, right, building large data centers. But the testing complexity as well as what you call package design, right? Packaging is you're encapsulating the wafer kind of chip in a plastic mode. So both packaging wise and test wise, the complexity is now increasing exponentially, which is a good thing. But Tessolve, we figured out how to address that, and but it's going to grow, and the challenges keep increasing.
Understand.
Yeah.
If you were to start Tessolve today, what would you do differently?
Good question. I mean, the hindsight is always 2020, but I would say some of the mistakes we made in the early days. One, I would say we could have been a little bit more financially more responsible. Obviously, our industry requires a lot of capex investment. We could have been more prudent about using leveraging capex from our customers or some of the equipment decisions. That's one. Because we had to take a lot of rounds of funding. Even if you take the letters of alphabets, right, A, B, C, D, we were in Series A, Series B, Series C, and so on. That diluted a lot of, a lot of our shareholding and so on. Also, I think we were also going after too many things. We would never say no to any customer, right? We would never say no to any opportunity. In the hindsight, I think it's good to have a little bit more focus. I can give you some examples, right? Some customers would sap a lot of energy, but the payout will be very little. So in the hindsight, it would have been better to say no to some of these opportunities. We were also looking at different things, right? Geographically and worldwide and so on. These two things, I would say, yeah. I mean, people-wise, I wouldn't change anything. That was the best thing that happened to us. Yeah, taking lesser money by being more financially responsible and saying no sometimes, right, to opportunities. That would be what would have done differently.
I understand. And to close out, and why we call this Founders Unfiltered, what is some unfiltered feedback that you received from someone that really impacted you personally or professionally, especially in your entrepreneurial journey?
I got a lot of unfiltered feedback, obviously, right? Because that during the course of the company. But what shaped me personally and professionally, I would say, I mean, this is again, some of this feedback was not life changing for me. But what really, I mean, during the course of the journey, what really changed was maybe I can tell you a small story. I used to travel a lot. And once I read in a newspaper, at that time people still used to read newspapers, San Jose Mercury News. There was an Indian guy who paid $650K US dollars to have lunch with Warren Buffett. So I was like fascinated, I mean, I heard of Warren Buffett, but I thought he was an investor. What's the big deal, right? He didn't build any companies. So this guy happened to be Monish Pabrai. Then I read a book that he had written, Dando Investor. And then there he was praising again Warren Buffett so much. Then I thought, okay, let me check out what this guy is about, right? Then I read a lot of Warren Buffett books. And then I also was curious about who are Warren Buffett's friends like, right? So Charlie Munger, his partner, who are Charlie's Almanac. And Warren Buffett's professor had written a book called Intelligent Investors. So I read a lot of. So that thought process and philosophy really changed how I thought, because I was already obviously an entrepreneur. But it's not just about investing. It's about how to live your life, how to think clearly. So that's what shaped me in my second half of my Tessolve stint. I would say, how to be more clear in your thinking and so on. Anybody who wants to probe further on Warren Buffett, I would say read this Essays of Warren Buffett, right, by Lawrence Cunningham. So I would say this one single person that really shaped my thought process and my both professional and personal. He doesn't know he's my mentor, but of course, I would say, professional career, I ran into this, and I was already in my 40s at that time. I wish I read about it when I was in my 20s, but but that's what really shaped my thought process. Yeah.
I understand. Super. Srini, thank you so much for your time and sharing your journey with us. Really learned a lot about the semiconductor ecosystem as well as what you've been building. It's quite exciting, and we're wishing you the best in the next leg and phase of Tessolve.
Thank you, Aviral and Mazin. Great talking to you, and wish you guys all the best in your journey.
Thank you.
Thank you.